power, mysterious, as well as mysteries hidden beneath the sands of time. The Egyptian pharaohs were stories rather than just kings. Stories of treachery, plotting, and extinct kingdoms are whispered by their imposing pyramids and secret tombs. Are you prepared to find out? Welcome to Echoes of the Past, the place where the biggest mysteries of history are revealed. Presenting the third Ramses. Ramses faced many enemies. He had to fend off Middle Eastern forces to defend Egypt. The real fight came from within the monarchy itself. His wife, Queen T, wanted her son to inherit the throne, so she came up with a scheme to murder her husband. Because it is recorded on a papyrus that is presently in Turin, we are completely aware of this historical event, which is known as the Harem Conspiracy. The tale goes that the conspirators were caught, the scheme failed, and they were sentenced to death. What happened to Ramses? Does his mother possess any evidence that clarifies what happened to him? Yes. We scanned his neck and found bandages around it. As you can see below, we couldn't tell why the bandage was a little bigger than the rest. After doing a CT scan, we found that he had been assassinated by having his throat cut. Whoa! So, was this a lethal wound? The monarch would have perished within minutes of the blood spurting from the wound, which was large enough to sever the neck. So no, he could not have survived. After 3 millennia, we finally discovered his assassination technique, which is amazing. History is fascinating because it is constantly changing. There is constant writing and rewriting of new storylines and chapters. In the Nile Delta, where the Mediterranean Sea and the vast River Nile converge, we are presently looking for number 9. The great treasures of Egypt are listed down. The Rosetta Stone. It was not merely a stone with Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. Underneath was what looked like a translation from ancient Greek. Examining the Greek, which they could still read, the experts first found the word Ptolemy, which they knew to be the name of a king. The challenging aspect was locating the equivalent in ancient Egypt. They looked for a cartouche, a bullet-shaped sign, among the hieroglyphs, and found that the pharaoh's name was always written there. Scientists originally had to study this term in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs to decipher a language that had been extinct for 1,500 years. Therefore, Ptolemy is the old Egyptian name up here, whereas Ptolemy is the Greek name down here. In this method, they were able to decode it. The semicircle is the letter T, the rope-like curve is the letter O, the lion is the letter L, the sand beneath is the letter P, and these two reeds are the letter Y. They might start slowly, piece by piece, recreating an ancient Egyptian alphabet so they could translate at any time. A hidden treasure that was so heavily encased in hieroglyphs that it took 40 years to interpret them is the next item we examine. When they were all translated, they told tales of incest and murder. At the center of it all was the family of Egypt's most famous queen, Cleopatra. We're traveling about 600 miles up the Nile River to a city in Upper Egypt. The 8th gem, the Temple of Edfu. This majestic temple was built by the Ptolemies, a single royal family who ruled Egypt from the 4th century BC until Cleopatra, the last and most famous member of the entire dynasty. The entire building tells the story of the ancient Egyptian queen and her family through the words and pictures carved into the stone walls. The entire gateway was built by Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy, who is seen ruthlessly killing his enemies and sacrificing prisoners. Ptolemy's enemies weren't all foreigners. An armed rebellion led by his daughter, Cleopatra's older sister, was brutally put down by him. He had little Cleopatra slain, leaving her as his heir. Given that Cleopatra's close family engaged in a deadly game of incest, murder, and intrigue for decades, it is possible to argue that this temple was a nest of snakes rather than a symbol of royal harmony. At least 7 of Cleopatra's 12 predecessors met a tragic end, and all of them were involved in incestuous marriages. As a result, when Cleopatra ascended to the throne in 51 BC, she inherited a complex family history in addition to this lovely temple, which served as a foundation for family dominance. One of Egypt's most famous relics, the Great Sphinx, is situated not far from Cairo. the nation's capital. Our eighth treasure is this one. Seventh on our list of treasures is the Great Sphinx in Giza. The Sphinx is located at the entrance to the Giza Plateau, which is noted for its massive pyramids and is one of the most visited tourist locations worldwide. However, even in these wonderful settings, the Sphinx is a spectacle. I'm constantly in awe of this incredible creature's size. It was the biggest sculpture in ancient Egypt and is now one of the biggest in the world. But that wasn't immediately clear to explorers when they first viewed the Sphinx. The massive statue was neck-deep in the sand. The only thing they could see sticking out was a huge stone head, which confused them. They could see the Sphinx in all its madness, though, once the sands were gone. A human head and shoulders on a lion's body, taller than a 6-story building. The Sphinx was essentially a huge guard dog that was carved out of the rock to watch over the pharaoh who was buried in the pyramid behind it. It was built on such a large scale for this reason. Even if it takes you past Egypt's far-flung southern border, the trip to Abu Simbel, which ranks 6th on our list of the top 10 treasures, is worthwhile. When you finally arrive at Abu Simbel, you can't help but be in awe. This temple was built by Ramses II, who was probably the greatest Egyptian king. At an astounding 66 years, his rule was among the longest in history. He also enjoyed building. The entire shrine is dedicated to honoring his reign. Furthermore, he is sending a clear message to the neighbors outside the southern border. This temple is repeatedly sending out the same message: I am in charge. Don't treat me badly. Ramses' ego is enshrined in stone, creating the most stunning setting. The walls of the temple are decorated with angry images of the pharaoh defeating his enemies. On our countdown, the Step Pyramid is at number 5. One of Egypt's oldest surviving monuments, the Step Pyramid was the first pyramid in history. It is 150 years older than the famous Great Pyramid at Giza and the Sphinx, and it is the first stone-cut edifice in history. Because of what's underneath my feet, rather than what's above, the Step Pyramid is on our list of treasures. Because down here lies a whole underground universe. In addition, this place has thousands, if not millions, of mummified bodies. For 3 millennia, it was a cemetery for queens, aristocracy, and regular Egyptians, but now it is the final resting place of 16 of Egypt's early pharaohs. Because so many mummies were buried here, Saqqara, which is more than 4 square miles in area, became Egypt's largest city of the dead. Apart from the fact that these mummies are amazing, archaeologists have discovered something else. In addition to humans, animals, incomprehensible numbers, are hidden here. 8 million mummified dogs in one mass grave. There are 4 million ibis birds in another. The necropolis was also home to fish, crocodiles, baboons, cats, and some, well, who knows? The 4th treasure will be found by going to an ancient city on the banks of the Nile, which is one of Egypt's most famous sites, a temple in Luxor. For thousands of years, this was one of Egypt's most exquisite temples. But if you're imagining a gloomy, peaceful setting, think again. This served as the party's main attraction. This place is noteworthy, not only for its stunning architecture, but also for the abundance of life that would have been there. There were priests, heads, and bodies shaven. It would have been a riot of color, too, with all these columns. Some traces can be seen there. Upon entering the courtyards, you were greeted by plates of electrum, a mixture of gold and silver, that would have produced a breathtaking show of light when the sun's rays were reflected. During festivals, Luxor was the top party destination. These amazing backflipping acrobats were among the many singers, musicians, and dancers who performed wild, drunken blowouts. This time, we're heading into the Rocky Mountains surrounding Luxor and escaping the big towns in pursuit of treasure number 3. We simply refer to it as the Valley of the Kings these days. Mummified bodies of pharaohs were brought here and buried in tombs hewn out of the high rocks of the valley from around 1600 BC. These are the only tombs we have found so far, and there are 63 hidden among these rocky places. These include the tombs of the most famous pharaohs in Egyptian history: Ramses III, who was slain, Tutankhamun, the child king, and Ramses the Great, who built Abu Simbel. Robbers were a major factor in the Egyptians' decision to bury their kings in this remote location. In the past, pharaohs were buried in massive pyramids, such as Saqqara's Step Pyramid. In addition to being magnificent demonstrations of their power and influence, these also functioned as powerful clues that wealth was concealed underneath. They were therefore particularly attractive to robbers and raiders. In the expectation that it would keep them safe in their tombs forever, the ancient Egyptians began burying their kings in this valley, far from curious eyes. But there was always going to be one treasure that was as near the top of the list as possible. We shall stay in the Valley of the Kings in search of the second treasure. When English archaeologist Howard Carter first discovered this tomb in 1922, few people knew of the pharaoh whose body was inside. But Tutankhamun would soon gain notoriety. This was because, unlike the other graves in the valley, the wealth in this one had been shielded from the robbers. And what precious jewels they are! This is one of 3 exquisite gold coffins found here, all like Russian dolls. The outside 2 were made of wood covered in gold, and the inner one weighed 100 kilograms and was made of real gold. Today, the value of the gold alone exceeds 3 million pounds. You can understand why these exquisite coffins were crafted of gold when you approach this close, because it was thought that the gods would acknowledge the actual divinity of these pharaohs, these godmen, when they were clad in gold. The gold coffin also contained the pharaoh's body. So here he is. This is the mummified body of a teenage Tutankhamun. I'm sorry for him. He seems quite weak. And remember, he is the sole mummy in the valley, remaining in his original tomb, lying alone in an empty room. According to Carter, the tomb's chambers initially contained wonderful things. Pharaohs were buried with hundreds, if not thousands, of personal items, including weapons, beds, gold, food, and even throw-pad feasts. A few of them even carried their cherished, mummified pets along. Therefore, it has everything you could need for your trip to the hereafter. The Great Pyramid at Giza is the first item on our list of Egyptian artifacts. At almost 150 meters above the earth, it remains one of the most spectacular buildings in the world. It is estimated that each brick, which weighs between 1 and 2.5 tons, would be laid every 2 minutes, every day, for more than 20 years to complete the construction of this pyramid. The stones that were brought came from all around Egypt, including granite from the south, which is more than 500 kilometers away. The whole Giza Plateau would have been a hive of activity with around 10,000 workers working at the biggest construction site in history. When the Great Pyramid was finally completed, it remained the tallest man-made structure in the world for 4,000 years. This monument never ceases to astonish me, regardless of how frequently I visit. If you merely think about how it affects me now, knowing how it was created, you can only imagine the impact it would have had on people's imaginations throughout history, not just for centuries, but for thousands of years. In addition, the pyramids would have looked far more impressive in their original configuration. They would have been encased in shining white limestone and scorched by the desert sun. Much of that case was shaken off when a massive earthquake occurred here about 700 years ago. But you may get a sense of what it would have looked like if you glanced at the top of that neighboring pyramid. You can see how inventive this setting would have been if you could see it in its heyday. It must have seemed almost futuristic to you.